get started, I like to be timely. So let's start today's October Lakeside Chat. Today's topic, for those of you that are joining, we've got a really good, I'm really excited about today's conversation. Feels like it's been the conversation that we've had internally at Lakeside since I started, is this conversation around how does small business manage the concept of having HR when maybe they don't really understand how much HR they need, but they know they need some of it. So today's topic is called Scaling Smart, HR Tips for Small Business. I am very excited to have my partner, one of my partners in crime, Becky Foy, here as another voice from the Lakeside team. And then Kassie, and Kassie, make sure I pronounce your last name correctly. I want to have you say your name just to make sure I don't say it wrong. Kassie, how do you pronounce the last name?
Kassie Inness. Great to see everyone today. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we'll jump right into introductions because, again, for those of you that have been on a Lakeside Chat in the past, I want to make sure we quickly get into content. And you also might know I am not great about giving introductions because I get uncomfortable when people give me my own introductions. I'm Erin Hargrove. I've been hosting the Lakeside Chats for the last 10 months. I am the Director of Business Development here at Lakeside HR Group. I am joined by Becky and Kassie, and I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves because I know, and we'll make sure that you are humble, but at the same time brag just a little about your backgrounds because I know both of you have a pretty exciting story to get a chance to tell. So Kassie, do you want to just start?
Sure. Again, good morning, everybody. My name is Kassie Inness. I am currently president of Metonic Real Estate Solutions. I've been in this role for 2 years, but at the company for 6. And I am a serial small business employee and leader. I love working for small companies. I think that the versatility and obviously the nimbleness fits my personality very well. I like to have my hands in a bunch of different aspects of the business. But I started in construction management. I worked my way kind of through the ranks of project management, and then I joined a developer in 2013 who is focused on multifamily, and I have not looked back ever since. So I've been in commercial real estate since 2013. And, just really loving what I do on the development side, the leadership side, and again, working for small companies where I get to kind of flex all of my different creative muscles and processes muscles through the business. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll pass it over to Becky.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Becky Foy, and I am Lakeside HR Group's Consulting Division Director. And I started with Lakeside back in July of last year, so it's only been a little over a year that I've been in the consulting world. Prior to that, I really started my career on the business side. I would tell people, an operator at heart. So I always think about how is the business running? How does the business need to run to be successful? So I always led there. And I joke and I say I fell into an HR career in the middle of that because the first thing that I learned is that people are at the heart of everything a business needs to do. So as I continued to explore where I wanted to take my career, I was with 2 large companies, Walmart and Best Buy. I had great careers with both of them, appreciate both of the companies tremendously for what I learned through them. But what I found over this past year is that I think I've found my people. I want to become that serial small business support in the HR space, Kassie. I love that you said that. Because I really believe this is a great space where there's a lot to offer from the operational and the HR space with our small businesses. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, both of you, for being here and for sharing your voice to the conversation. I'm going to just set the stage for what we're going to do today, and then we're going to start jumping right into some of what I would say is sort of the backbone of how Lakeside Chats run, and then we'll jump right into some of the content. So I want to just start with the idea that we want to do a little bit of information reaction, and at the same time, we want to tell a story. I think one of the reasons why we thought Kassie's story was so interesting was that she's got a really interesting approach as to how she talked about her role and the organizations that she's worked with. But I think it's interesting to see the relationships that she has from the president level in terms of how she's been able to approach HR. And so we're going to do some storytelling today. And so for those of you that are on, come with questions, come with reactions. We want to make sure that we engage you guys as much as possible. But that it'll be a little different setup than what we've done in the past, and which I'm really excited about. But with that, we're going to do a quick reminder for those of you that are potentially new to Lakeside Chats. Rules of engagement, just so you know that there are no bathrooms for me to point out, but I will let you know in terms of how you are expected to engage for today's session. One, right out the gate, I want to just let everyone know that this is a recorded session. So the recording is used for a couple different reasons. One, we send it back out to you guys so that you have a link to the recording, so that if you want to go back and revisit some of the amazing nuggets that we review throughout today's conversation, you have that access to that piece of it. But also it lives and breathes on our website for people to access who maybe potentially weren't able to be here for the live session. But just so everyone is aware, you are being recorded. Like I said, the deck to today will be provided. You'll notice it's not a very involved deck. We like to make the conversation sort of be the star and not the materials. But anything that we follow up throughout the day, you'll get a follow-up email from me with the link to the deck, a link to the recording, any of the content we might have referenced throughout, and then links to future Lakeside Chats, just to make sure you're aware as to where we're headed. We want you to engage. So we've already seen that the chat's being used. We want you to use the question answer, the raise your hand, react, all of the things throughout today's session. We want you to be truly participants throughout. So if you've got questions, if you have a voice to share, we want to make sure that we're including it. Today, you'll notice everybody's cameras are noted off, as well as your mics, but your mics are able to be turned on. So in the case where I maybe want to call out somebody in the room, or if there's a really great question in the chat that I think it makes more sense to come from your voice than from mine, I may ask you to turn your microphone off if you're okay with that. And then we'll kind of keep the engagement at its highest level from that degree. We do encourage positive discussion and genuine curiosity. Many of you know that one of Lakeside's values is to be curious, and so that's our goal today, is to show our level of curiosity. We also recognize that we aren't coming in here with any, I don't know, maybe you guys do, but I don't think I have any like, I plan to know everything, or that you guys plan to know everything. We genuinely recognize that there is no right answer. We're just sharing information and starting a really great conversation. So thank you all for being here, and we'll jump right in. The idea of this chat is I started to think about small business and HR and the relationship between the two. I started to doing some digging, because obviously there's been this visceral reaction to how small businesses manage HR, being here at Lakeside and helping small businesses with their HR function. But I wanted to see if there was some stats to protect or sort of support the ideas of where we're at. And Becky, Kassie, I want you to react as we review these. So the first one that I'm going to call out is the fact that Forbes did a report recently this year and was doing a kind of a breakdown. And one of the things that they called out is that there should be 1.4 HR staff for every 100 employees. Kassie, Becky, what are your thoughts on the ratio there?
Becky, I'm going to let you start. You've seen a lot more of this, and then I'll chime in.
Okay. Yeah, and when you look at that study, I mean, we've heard for years that it's 1 to 100, right? But that's going up now. You're starting to see more and more HR staff added into companies. But when you also look at that, I think about that number 100. When I think about the number of clients that we have that are between 2 to 35, that number is a lot larger than the companies with 100. So it's, how do we help them? How do we figure out what they need when you're not at that 100 where you're going to hire that first HR person?
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
And in my past, what I've seen, and you know, I've gained experience through a lot of mistakes. And in the smaller companies that I've worked for, so I worked for a company of 6 people, of 45 people, of 12 people, and now about 20 people. And HR was always an afterthought, and it was something that was very reactionary versus being more proactive. And so again, learning through mistakes that we have made, I think that even if you have 6 employees, or as Becky said, as little as 3 employees, you need to have some sort of HR support. And we'll talk a lot about fractional HR support today, but I would even say this number sometimes even seems a little bit low, in my opinion, just because I think that in this day and age and in these times that we're in, we probably need more HR support than what we even recognize.
Yeah, I think we had a recent client use the phrase, I need that tool in my toolbox, right? No matter how, I think they were an 8-person organization. So you are recognizing that you do need to make sure, to your point, Kassie, that it isn't just a reactive thing, that instead that it is a tool in your toolbox that you have access to when you need it, so that you're not in a place where you're, I don't know, running to the hardware store, I guess, at the last minute, trying to figure out where that last tool might be. All right, next statistic. ADP did an ad hoc HR management study and found that 70% of employers under 50, so Becky, we're getting closer to that number we were just talking about, assign HR tasks to employees that don't have HR experience. And I would say, one, I think that this resonates with me, but I'd be curious to know what your guys' thoughts. Kassie, you talked about the idea of being reactionary. Does this kind of fall into that camp there?
Yeah, so until 18 months ago, when we engaged Lakeside, we did not have HR support at Metonic. And the executive leadership team, who had no business being in a lot of the HR policies, processes, compliance, employee relation type matters, we handled all of that. And we were so reactionary, sometimes to the point where it had gotten so bad that maybe an employee left or needed to be terminated because of maybe a kind of a culture cancer. But I would say that this was a huge mistake that we made kind of in my first few years at Metonic by not having any sort of HR support and just kind of like figuring it out as an executive leadership team, and very reactionary, and probably a deficit for our team.
Yeah. Becky, is this what your team is seeing as well? Kind of, is this kind of coming in and being the, I'm going to call it the voice of reason, or sort of the beacon of light in terms of where coming in and adding that additional commentary where they've been doing it without?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Cassie's spot on. I mean, first of all, you're trying to control costs. Let's call it what it is, right? That's why you don't bring HR in at that point in time. But being able to have someone that you can call when you need them, but also engage them in your business in different ways throughout, so that they aren't somebody fresh every time you're calling them, is always really good. And you're right. Like when I think about IT and I think about HR. So back in the day, IT, used to let anybody do it at first and let them figure it out. And now that's a scary proposition. Well, HR, it's kind of a scary proposition too, especially with how quickly laws and things are changing. It's important to have somebody who's really paying attention to those things for your business for you.
Yeah. All right. So then, similar but different, this last stat is the idea that they found that half of small businesses are handling their HR matters in-house. So this goes to the conversation of the external or the outsource option versus internal options. Becky, I want you to kick off on this one. Kind of what are you seeing when you're thinking about those small businesses and how they what's being done in-house versus when are they looking to outside resources?
Yeah, one of the things this year that I really saw an increase in was calling us for employee relations, and really trying to help bring a neutral third party into that conversation, to help through, and also making sure that you have somebody who has some of that background in how you help in those matters. The other big one is compliance. Obviously, compliance, there are changing laws in just about every state. And I can tell you, trying to keep up with 35 states right now, which is what we try to do, it is not an easy task. And I can't imagine, small businesses, especially when they're in multi-states, how they're keeping up with that if they're not looking for a source to be that person to help support the work.
Kassie, we're going to make sure we revisit that multi-state piece with you. Kind of what are your thoughts when you hear, because we started today with the idea that you're growing into even in areas of California. So which we all in HR, everyone that's on HR in this call right now immediately cringes when they hear California from a compliance standpoint. So what's your thoughts when you hear what Becky just said about the compliance and or employee relations needs?
Oh my gosh. I think one of the questions that you guys posed for me is what was happening in our business when we started thinking about outsourced HR. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here and just talk to that because I think this is super relevant for this particular bullet point. But we engaged Lakeside, as I mentioned, 18 months ago in March of 2023. And our executive leadership team was spending an exorbitant amount of time on employee relations and compliance. And at that time, we had a new CEO who was sitting in an office in Chicago. And so we had a compliance piece in the state of Illinois in Cook County, and then we had Nebraska, then we had an employee who was living in Florida. And so this kind of just spiraled out of control for our executive leadership team. We had no idea how to handle all of those different states when it came to rules and regulations and payroll. And so we really needed to have assistance from an expert in the field. And that's one of the reasons, and I'll talk about more later, but one of the reasons why we look to outsource and engage Lakeside.
Yeah. It's interesting, I think, especially as we think about what COVID has done to remote work and where the work can get done too, right? Immediately, I think we started to look at new definitions of even just where, I mean, even compliance. And Becky, I know you know this, right? There's the concept of where do you live and where do you work and where is work headquartered. And all of those nuances create a different level of a compliance concern in terms of how do we approach it and how do we handle it and what needs to be in our policies to make sure that we are in fact managing to it. Well, thank you guys. We're going to keep moving, but I want to engage the group on the call and get the chat rolling a little bit. So you've heard some stats when we talk about small business and HR, and I want to just get an idea from those of you in the room, because I know we've got some of you that are with small businesses, some of you with larger. What elements what does your team take into consideration when they consider how to size their HR teams? And as we wait kind of for some of the reactions to come through, I want to get your guys' perspective. Kassie, was there a size threshold or I mean, we talked about that ratio, but was there a size threshold or was it a need when you started to look for 18 months ago, when you started to consider what outsourcing options might be?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So in March of 2023, when we engaged Lakeside, we had 30 FTEs, which is about 10 more than we have right now. And so at that employee count, that's when we really started to notice that there were employee relation issues that couldn't be dealt with by our executive team. And it really took a lot of our bandwidth in order to, again, cultivate that culture and make sure that our employees were happy. And if we had issues with, terminations or attrition, things like that, that we needed support. So for us, I think that it probably was at a lower employee count, but at the same time, we really started to feel it when we got to that 30 FTEs. So that was the tipping point for us. And now I know that we have it. Like, we were so reactionary in everything that we did. And so I would say that employee count should have been even lower, but that's just my experience.
Yeah, I love what's coming through in the chat, because I think we're seeing things like, obviously we recognize the state piece of it of being a high reason for when you start to recognize you need that HR piece of it. We're also seeing industry, which I think is super interesting to hear, because I think that there's a degree of employee, I mean, especially as Becky, you talk about the employee relations piece of it. Industry can play a big part in terms of how closely are they managed, where is the work being done, what type of work are they managing too, which I think is an interesting one. Ray said the obvious answer, which is the one that, again, if you didn't say it, Ray, somebody was going to have to, and it's the concept of budget, which we'll get into further. I liked the idea, and I wanted to get your guys' reaction. Kassie, you talked about being a 30 person and being 20. I want to talk about turnover. Becky and Kassie, kind of from your perspective, how much does turnover rate play into the conversation around when do you engage HR? Becky, you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the business and where that turnover is coming from. I think so. There's a lot in that. But definitely turnover can play into it because then you're going to need more support with hiring, more support with training, more support with onboarding, all of the pieces that fall into that. So turnover is problematic in so many ways inside your business.
Kassie, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. So right now we are currently hiring for 2 full-time employees positions within Metonic. And we outsource to Lakeside Recruiting, which is great because it really ties in with our HR piece for compliance and onboarding. And even our hiring process that we have a DE&I component that we pulled into. So that's really nice. But if we as an executive leadership team had to do that all on our own, which we've done in the past, which is, sourcing and interviewing and then extending offer letters. And then if that falls through, then starting that process all over again, it is such a bandwidth and time suck. And I'm not saying that that's not a high payoff activity to add kind of a key strategic player into your business. But at the same time, like we as an executive team should be focused on, kind of the revenue driving or maybe more of the corporate culture than we should, hiring. And so I think to Becky's point, that's just such a huge part of this fractional piece is providing or bringing in support or getting support where your business needs it at the time. And, there are some months where we don't have that, but there may be an employee relations issue or a benefits issue or something like that. And so it's kind of offsetting issues. If you're not hiring at a given time, there's likely something else in a policy or process that needs to be updated. So
Perfect. I want to tap into a couple things that came out and sort of tie into what you just said as well. The variance of what HR means, which is, I think, the one thing that I think is a really important component to what we're talking about here, right? HR in some companies is payroll. Some companies it's not, right? So payroll becomes a necessary function. But as you think about, does HR fit into that personal role of payroll? The other thing that you mentioned is the concept of recruiting and the idea of the necessary kind of the process by which finding good candidates become another component, right? When we talk about what the idea of what outsourced or insourced HR function looks like, oftentimes employers are doing hiring, right? Even without an HR function, they are for sure running payroll, or God, they better be running payroll even if they don't have an HR function. So I do think it's an interesting conversation that I think somebody in the chat talked about is what constitutes HR and kind of how does the company look at the role of HR, right? Do they see HR as a compliance component, or do they see recruiting as an element of HR? Do they see payroll as a portion of HR? Any reactions from you guys in terms of that sort of classification piece?
yeah, I mean, I would just say my reaction to that is, obviously all of the above. We bifurcate it a little bit. So just Metonic, what we use HR support for is obviously employee relations, compliance, policies and procedure updates. We do something, and I'm really proud of like what we did with Lakeside to integrate fractional HR into our team and involving Becky and Kristen in the beginning in our meetings. So in our all team meetings, bringing them in as they are part of the organization. So that way the company and the employees feel some level of comfort as, if they're joining our all team meetings or if they're joining our DE&I committee meetings. So really integrating them into that process, which I think is really a great idea. And then we use our controller to do the payroll piece, the benefit piece, everything that we use ADP for, kind of our controller manages that. So we don't commingle that very much with Becky, again, unless there's a compliance aspect of it. So I feel like we have a really nice balance between the fractional piece and then what we do internally. And so I think that may look different for every small business and every company, depending on the expertise that's on the team or what they need in additional support. But like, I think we've figured out a really great balance between the two for us.
That's awesome. And I think that it leans into the last bullet point that came through the chat, which is a kudos to you too, Kassie, as it depends on senior leadership's view and value of HR brings to the company and business, which is, I think, a great testament to the way you're leading your business as well. Okay, Becky, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No. I was just going to say she's spot on. And I would tell you, in most of the small businesses that I have worked with, HR is a part of your finance function, because you do that day-to-day finance part of it is a strong connection from a budget perspective. So we do see a lot of small businesses that connect those two, which then when you come in a fractional space, you're then picking up in places that are more directed towards the people, the culture, helping with things that are really going to matter and help the business move forward in that way.
Yeah. Thank you all for chiming in. Thank you, both of you, for keeping the conversation rolling. This was great. All right. Well, I want to hand this over to Becky, because as you can tell, there's a relationship there. And I think it'll be really interesting to hear the conversation between Becky and Kassie in terms of the case study of Metonic. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Becky.
All right, excellent. Yes, Kassie and Metonic are, they're some of my favorite clients. I won't say they're my favorite because I probably have other clients on here, so I'd hate to upset anyone. But I do love working with the team, and like Kassie said, it's great because I've gotten to know the team. I get to sit on a few different committees, come to their team meetings, so it is a fun group to work with. But Kassie, why don't you tell us a little bit about Metonic? Size, location, the growth.
Sure. I find my industry a little bit boring at times, and so I don't want to bore this group with all the nuts and bolts of what we do. So I'll give you a very, very high level of Metonic, and then we can kind of talk about our growth strategy. But we are a real estate investment sponsor. We are headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska, with 20 FTEs, as I've mentioned. We also have a small 3-person office in Chicago. So hence the compliance of people living in different and working in different states. Our business is primarily focused on multifamily asset management, new investment opportunities like acquisitions, developments. And we have 79 properties across 6 states, or over 1.3 billion in assets under management. So with that being said, and as it relates to kind of HR and small business, we are a very lean and mean team. With only about 20 FTEs and that much oversight of commercial real estate. And we have fluctuated, as I've mentioned kind of on this call already, we've fluctuated between 15 and 30 employees over the last 5 or 6 years. I think one really hard time was a year ago in fall of 2023. Thank God that Lakeside was already on board in a fractional HR for us, but we had to go through a pretty significant reduction in force. And, myself and the rest of the executive leadership team had not been through something like that. We, had about 30 days from decision to termination. And it was probably one of the hardest and most trying times in my career because Becky talked a lot about people leadership, and that is something that's a huge passion of mine, just the people and the employee relations and, empowering others. And to have to lay off, at the time we laid off 6 employees, it was definitely one of just the most difficult things that I've had to do because these were friends and colleagues. And so without that support, I don't know how we would have gotten through it, but we are now kind of strategically building back up our company. We have a new CEO in place. And so it's been positive since then, but I just wanted to bring that up because, I think that when we were sitting at 30 employees, when we first engaged Lakeside, everything was great and sunny and awesome. And then, not 6 months later, Lakeside had to help us do a significant reduction in force, which was tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And you all handled it so well. And it's not anything anybody wants to go through. So So thinking about that, and you already mentioned this a little bit in our earlier conversation, but can you talk a little bit more about what was happening in the business that really made you think we need some support in HR? It's time.
Yeah, um, so one particular example, was a substantive update to our handbook. And the executive leadership team, we knew that our handbook was, old and outdated. In that particular handbook, we had 3 weeks of maternity leave, which is absolutely not market and not what Metonic stood for in our core values. And we really had no idea like how to kind of go about this. And so the initial look for fractional HR was maybe more of like a one-time scope of work. And then in getting referred to Kristen and really starting to talk to her about what a fractional, kind of support could look like, we realized that like, okay, look, there's a lot of other things that we are not doing, kind of more of that reactionary HR leadership. And so we ultimately ended up engaging Lakeside to do not only our handbook update, but just kind of a monthly recurring HR support for us to help with that compliance and employee relations, and then having the add-on for recruiting, joining our team meetings. And then we also, at the time, we started a compensation committee. This was another initiative that we didn't really know that we needed at the time, but we found out that we were underpaying a lot of our staff. And so with our compensation committee and with Kristen and Becky now being a part of that committee, we're able to like really look at the market, what somebody in an asset manager position should be getting paid, or a finance position should be getting paid as it compares to market. And so now I think that has morphed into something a lot bigger than what we had originally anticipated, but it's been a huge value add to the company.
Excellent. So when you were going through those moments, how much was cost a factor for you?
I mean, it's always a factor, right? But I think that when you do, because we're always looking at cost benefit analysis in real estate. Okay, so we're always in spreadsheets and always looking at numbers. And when we started to look at our downside of if we didn't have HR support, so let's say something happened with an employee termination or an employee relations issue that put Metonic in a position of legal liability. And we really started looking at that downside exposure. We were like, no matter what, having HR and having that support, that niche support, is going to be much more of a cost benefit to us than a devaluation to us. So it actually, like when you look at it from, a potential employee lawsuit, which we almost had on our hands back in 2022, that could have cost the company tens of thousands of dollars that probably could have been handled much more eloquently if we would have had HR support. It was really a no-brainer for us to spend the money, have the long-term engagement, and know that we have protection in place, just like you would with liability insurance or anything else like that.
Yeah. When you were looking at it, did you consider possibly hiring your own full-time HR in-house versus going with the fractional?
No, I think that, and somebody mentioned in the chat, maybe the type of business or the professional level of employees that you employ. Like, we knew that we did not have enough need to have somebody full-time. We do have an office manager, we do have a legal operations manager, and they probably know enough just to be dangerous with the HR component, but without having that experience and that niche expertise, like we never considered doing an in-house, and knew that fractional was the way to go for our company.
Okay. And so doing something like this is never easy, right? It's change to your organization, and sometimes that can bring challenges. What were some of
Mhm.
the things you learned and maybe would do differently and when you added fractional HR in?
I'm going to start with the things that I really like that I kind of mentioned that we did. So positive, and then I'll think maybe about the things that we should have done differently. But I really like how we integrated the fractional HR as if they were an employee within the company. And so as we've talked about the meetings and the committees and actually bringing Kristen and Becky into town, into Omaha, so people can have face to face. Now, obviously, that's another expense to the business, but that integration piece was really, really important for us because most employees aren't going to say something is negative or is bothering them until it's too late. And so giving them a level of comfort with HR support so they can go to them early and often to have those conversations about maybe things that need to change about the organization was very important to us. So it is very hard to find employees in commercial real estate, asset management, acquisitions, developments. Again, it's a niche expertise. And so anytime we lose a person, we know it's going to take months in order to backfill that role. And so we can't have the too little, too late mentality. We need to be ahead of all of that. So as far as things that maybe didn't go so well, I really think that we've been in a best case scenario here. Obviously, the RIF was terrible, but I think all things considered, like having Lakeside and their support was a huge help to us. That was just something in our business that wasn't going well. I think that, having employees that are in Florida, Chicago or Illinois, Nebraska, understanding that and making sure that we're staying on top of those compliance issues because we don't know what we don't know. And so obviously pulling in Lakeside's expertise on that. But I don't, there's not a lot of like negative happenings, I think, with the relationship and hopefully that stays that way and we don't see some sort of major issue in our business where that would change my perspective there.
Okay. And so when you think about it, can you break down maybe for some of the listeners on the call, how you separate some of the work that is considered HR? What are some of the things that your team is doing versus some of the things you have me do?
Okay, great. Yep. So we use ADP and our controller and I manage payroll and benefits, paid time off, which is a flex PTO policy. All of that is managed by our controller. Another thing that we do in-house that sometimes maybe small businesses may or may not have or use fractional for is kind of employee relations culture, kind of that culture cultivation. We have an events committee that we handle all within house that we do not have Becky handle from an HR perspective. And so they'll do Christmas parties and fall outings and summer outings and, going away parties or, maybe baby showers, things like that. So sometimes somebody could use an HR individual to handle those sorts of events. We obviously do that in-house. And then there's a handful of things that we've mentioned that we commingle. So our compensation committee, our monthly DE&I committee that we meet the first Friday of every month, and Becky is involved in that. Volunteering. So Becky has consulted on like how we should go about volunteering efforts and how we bring the team in to make sure that their voices are heard for organizations that are maybe passionate to them. So that's kind of the areas where we commingle. And then the scopes of work that I've mentioned previously that Lakeside handles for us when it comes to processes, policies, compliance, employee relations, and recruiting.
Excellent. So it looks like we do have a question in the chat. When you wear so many hats, how do you determine the priority of your tasks?
That's a really good question. So there are 5 of us there are 4 of us. We just had our CFO leave recently. So there are 4 of us on our executive leadership team. And we have a very specific accountability chart where we, in this accountability chart, put our, top 5 to 10 high-level responsibilities for each executive employee in this accountability chart. And in that, we focus on what our HPAs are, so our high payoff activities. What are the things that are going to drive the business, drive the culture, and drive the revenue? And so our team, our executive team, we meet weekly. We just met before this call this morning, and we talk about what those priorities are, what those HPAs are, how we can move the business forward, how we can move the culture forward, where we need to draw in support. And so we've focused a lot as an executive team on delegation. And so for our middle level managers, what can we delegate down to? What do we need to pull in fractional support for? So we obviously have Becky on the HR side. We have fractional marketing services. We have fractional tax services. So who do we need to pull in order to help support our team? And then a lot of it is just, trial by fire. If we think this is top priority, then we'll focus our time on it. But I would say that our accountability chart is key for us in order to make those decisions.
Thank you for answering that. I thought that was a really good question to really bring up, especially since we have both fractional HR on the call and we also have small business, because it is definitely a balancing act. And, I love when you talk about it, Kassie, because it's also very, very thoughtful in the approach that you've taken in how you separate the work out and how you think about that. And it shows up for your team as leaders when you're able to be that thoughtful about the work that you're doing. So thank you for that. So last question, and then I'll turn it back over to Erin. But in your opinion, how has Metonic benefited from your hybrid approach to managing HR?
I've said this a lot during this call, but you don't know what you don't know. And 18 months ago, we didn't know what a positive impact fractional HR would have on our business and our company. I feel like we have been so much more efficient than we were in the past when it comes to all of the HR matters that we've discussed today. So it has been by far one of the biggest value adds that we have put in place for our company so we can continue to strategically grow. Now, sometimes obviously you need to downsize or take a few steps back in order to move the business forward, which we did in the fall of 2023. But now I feel like we are just running at lightning speed because we can draw on that support that we need. Again, we're making 2 new strategic hires. The processes are in place and they're just rolling forward. I feel like we've now kind of turned into more of a well-oiled machine than even when we had 30 employees and kind of just like running around with our hair on fire, being super reactionary to everything, losing employees because we didn't know that they were upset or like had an issue with how we were running the organization. And now there's just a lot more authenticity and direct communication, candor, radical candor, as Becky recommended the book for me, and I absolutely love. So there's a lot more radical candor in our business. So again, we didn't know what we were missing until we found it. And now I feel like we are just in a much, much better place.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Kassie. Thank you so much. Erin, we'll kick it back over to you.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to kick it back out to the group because I want to hear from them because we heard, and this was great because I think that what we heard in terms of what does human resources, I mean, you just ended with such a great question to lead right into this, and it's almost like we prepped for this so that you knew what slide was coming next. But the idea of being able to just talk about the idea of what efficiencies come from having HR, being able to scale growth is such a true picture as to potentially how having that HR arm can impact the business. But I want to ask the room, what impact is HR having on your business? Which ways are you feeling like whether you're in HR or you're around HR, what ways are you seeing that you're starting to see that transition? And you have to, Becky and or Kassie, what is the name of the book? Do you have the author? Because apparently everyone wants to now read it.
Radical Candor is the name of the
Yeah.
book. Becky recommended it. It's phenomenal. And I'll give you guys 3 other books that our executive team just read for small business. And I feel like they're really great practical application. So they're all Dan Sullivan books. Who Not How, 10X is Easier Than 2X, and The Gap in the Gain. So those are 3 great books for small businesses and entrepreneurs. We, again, have a little bit of a book club for our executive leadership team. We read them and we talk about how to implement them into our business. But Radical Candor was the first one that we read as a recommendation by Becky. And it's all about just being super candid and open, direct communication with each other and with team members.
Perfect. I just so as you guys know, I will make sure that I put that in the follow-up materials as well. So you've got the links to those books so you know which books we're talking about. So thank you for, I think everyone appreciates a great book recommendation on either side. So thank you for that. And I think it's really cool to hear you guys are doing an internal book club even at the executive level. I feel like it holds yourself accountable to making sure that you're reading it and determining which things apply and which things don't, right? I mean, we read enough self-help or professional level books that sometimes it's the idea of being able to say, I'm not sure how much of this is immediately applicable, but if you're doing it with your team, you can start to determine which stuff is and which stuff isn't, which is great. Not getting a ton on this question, which is fine. Can I ask one more question? I know I plugged it into chat. I was just with a client yesterday who's looking to add fractional HR to the mix. And I think the concern they had at the beginning was, if all of a sudden we don't have HR and then we do, are we opening a floodgate for a bunch of new issues that maybe we didn't know about? Kassie, when you guys brought in 18 months ago, when you guys made the decision to add a fractional HR component, did you worry about that, or kind of how did you navigate that concern?
That's actually a really good question. And no, it was not a concern of ours because, again, as we were trying to get closer to our employees, closer to their needs, wanting to understand what we were doing well and maybe not so well, like we saw it in more of a, positive growth mindset than like kind of like the downside what ifs. And so, I mean, there may be some of that, but I honestly think that if you do it in a way where you integrate your HR into the company, I think it's only a net positive. And I think that if anything, and Becky can attest to this, but she doesn't really hear that much from our staff. And when she does, it's like very easily worked through. And I think that they just appreciate that they have Becky as kind of a sounding board or somebody maybe outside, a little bit more outside of the organization to give them perspective. Becky, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think what I see, and I've definitely seen this at Metonic, is bringing HR in also helps the leadership at the same time that it's a resource for the employees. And I think what I've noticed with many of the leaders when they bring us in, they start to do things that maybe in the past they weren't doing with their team. And it really helps develop a relationship differently with employees. So I think in a lot of ways, bringing us in actually brings them closer to leading through their people a little bit more than maybe they were before. So I haven't seen a situation where many things tend to pop up or more frequency or bigger issues happen because you have HR in place. I actually have seen it happen just the opposite.
Yeah, good. I mean, good. It means one, I answered that question correctly, and two, it helps me. It was to your point question. I thought it really was an interesting question. And it goes to potentially some of the earlier portions of the chat, right? I mean, maybe it's the industry, maybe it's the size, maybe it's, maybe they waited too long to have HR a necessary element of their business too. Maybe they should have had it soon. I mean, there's all sorts of elements to where that question came from, but I did think it was it put me back on my heels, and I thought it was appropriate to bring up here just because as you introduced it through that fractional lens and they started to get to know a name and a face, it changes the relationship that people start to have with HR. So thank you for being candid there. Becky, I want to jump back. I want to jump to you now because I know obviously from what you're saying, you've talked about employee relations and compliance being the two big sort of growth areas that your team is navigating on a regular basis. But I know we got a blog out here recently that you help with where you talked about a lot of the areas that your team is sort of tackling. So you want to just talk about, I put them in 8 boxes. You can put them into as many boxes that make sense to you. But I just feel like being able to think about what are the things that you're seeing small businesses bringing to light in terms of where they're leaning into your team.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, I counted it. We actually have written 25 handbooks this year. So, handbooks is a big one. And then we've done several revises and updates and policy changes. So that is a big area. That's usually like a first step into really thinking of how can fractional HR really support your business. But I'll mention that we've seen a little bit of a spike as we've done several investigations this year for companies. We've also done several performance development, unfortunate helping people through terminations. But we're seeing a little bit more in that space of employee relations as well. But then we've also done some comp and benefits work where we're helping people really in some cases determine comp and benefits, but then also helping them with which is the right system to use, which is the right company to go with. So it's really kind of helping them through also the rollout of compensation and benefits, that more tactical piece of it. And then job descriptions. And then on the consulting side, we have a full division for recruiting that can be a little bit deeper and really help people source the right talent for roles. But we also see that with the fractional work, we oftentimes help with that more administrative side of recruiting. And so that leads with job descriptions and helping in that space, as well as we're getting several requests this year around leadership development and coaching. So those are just some of the things that I've seen this past year. But the one that really, I think, often brings us in for the first time for people to really start experiencing is really when it's, hey, we need a handbook or we need a policy. And then what starts to build from there is, wow, this was actually way easier than how I was trying to do this before. What else can you do for us? And that's what's led to a lot of the other things that you see on here.
I want to lean into that again. It's this recency syndrome sort of coming out here. I'm coming out of the conversation, the same conversation yesterday, where they found themselves in the place where they've been working on their handbook a lot and realizing they need to get it over the line, and they're kind of getting stuck in their own way to get it completed. I'm just bringing that to light because I think that's. Can you, Howard, kind of talk through that sort of transition of doing it in-house? Because you recognize, right, there's a cultural piece of it. There's decisions that need to be made, but then getting in your own way, and how does having HR be an extra voice there?
Was that for Kassie?
That's to you. I guess that was to you. Just to see
it's me. Okay, I'm sorry.
How your team is sort of helping people get through, kind of getting out of their own way in that space. Sorry, I should have.
Nope, that's okay.
I'm like looking at you. You can't tell I'm looking at you.
I cannot tell. Okay, so yeah, absolutely. We've seen this. We actually helped a client who had been working on their handbook for over 2 years bring their handbook finally over the line and get it done. And what was stopping them was constantly second guessing and questioning first how you wrote it, then has the law changed? Is there something else we should be including? And just really, when you don't have that confidence in here's how it should be, bringing somebody in who can help you with that confidence side of it really can help push it along. But I think the other thing to understand about things like handbooks, we don't just give you a process document form that says, here's the process, put this document form. we ask you to add your culture into it. We ask you to add who you are into it, because a lot of times that's what we'll see when we pick up some of the handbooks that people want us to look at, is they've built a policy manual versus an employee handbook. And you think about an employee handbook, it's one of the first things that you're going to hand somebody to tell them about who you are and what some of your policies are. And we know it's for compliance, but we should make it more about a welcoming to your company as much as it is about compliance.
I love
Could I
that.
add to that?
Yeah, I would love if you would.
Okay, so because this is so relative and new for us, since we just updated our employee handbook, we had Becky give us the nuts and bolts. So just all the compliance, the legalese, making sure that we had the necessary policies in our handbook. And then we created a small task force. So there were 5 employees in the company who were in this task force. It was everything from executive, myself, and then middle level managers, and then more junior associates that we tasked them to go through the employee handbook and just radical candor, give us your thoughts on like what you think of this, where we should maybe relook at a policy, how we can add in our core values, our archetype. So we have a company archetype, a welcoming kind of paragraph. And it was a really, really great process because we got buy-in from a certain number of employees who were able to kind of be the voice with other people within the organization. And then we had the compliance legalese piece from Becky. And then I did like a welcome paragraph from, kind of an executive leadership core value standpoint. And it was just a really seamless process of how we went through that. And it kind of creates like all company buy-in there.
I love that. There's a degree, I think there's a bit of a playbook in terms of what you just talked about there, Kassie, in terms of what not just small business, but what all businesses should do when they're rolling out a handbook. I love the concept of the buy-in, getting voices from multiple people, but having that compliance piece and that framework already in place to get that started. I know we have just a few minutes left, but I don't want to lose Sarah's question. The conversation around engagement and employee engagement. Becky, I'm thinking this one's leaning into you, but obviously either of you can take it. Are you doing engagement surveys? How are you measuring, or kind of what are the things you're doing? Are they stay interviews? Are there things that you're doing to sort of navigate that space? And is HR playing that role, or Kassie, or are you guys doing that internally?
Yeah, so we are doing exit interviews. We have a pretty stringent onboarding process of people, like when they come in, meeting with the different departments and executive leadership, learning about the history of our company, welcome baskets, all of that is an onboarding process. And then we do engagement surveys. And so we try and roll out, 1 to 2 a year. We get the same sort of results like year over year. Our younger employees want more transparent communication from executive leadership. And so we've really tried to ramp that up. And in our monthly team meeting, myself, our CEO, will talk about, where the company's headed, or give them an update on budgets, and some of our bonuses are tied to company performance. So we do that. And then again, we have Becky as a backstop. If anybody has any issues or concerns, that they go to her, and then Becky and I have a conversation once a month. So we have a one-on-one at the end of every month, and we kind of update each other on those employee type relation matters.
Awesome. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, including yours. So thank you both. I think Jen's last comment is validating in my own right of hearing that fact that like this is a really important topic. I think it is really helpful to hear. I mean, even to start to seeing how long people are staying on, it's really great to see how people are engaged in this particular topic and how much. I think there's a lot of questions out there in terms of how to navigate it. So Kassie, thank you so much for sharing your story, but also sharing your process. I think that there's so much around the idea of the growth story that you've gone through, but also being able to hear kind of the mindset you took to approach it. So thank you. And Becky, obviously, you're my person. So thank you for being that person for me throughout today's conversation as well. Just to let everyone know, the next Lakeside Chat will be on November 12th. So it's about a month away. I've got lots of work to do. And the conversation for next month is going to be called Game On, Unlocking success through coaching. We've got a really great external speaker, Glenn Dahl, who is an executive coach here locally. He works in a lot of different capacities, but I think that the word coach has been one of those areas that I think some people question really what the role is and how to understand what role that can play in a leadership role. So we're going to bring that conversation to light next month. Hoping to have many of you back. Kassie, Becky, thank you so much. And on behalf of Lakeside, thank you all and have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Hi, thank you so much.
You.
Bye, guys.
Bye.